everyone, welcome back to my class. This is Mehjabin Fatima, a teacher at Ahlabeth High School and Junior College. Today in this session we are going to start 11th chapter of Social Studies from 7th standard, that is New Kings and Kingdom. Now let's begin with our chapter. Basically this chapter consists of two parts and now we are going to start part 1, that is the emergence of new dynasties. By the 7th century, there were many influential landlords or warriors, chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates or samantas. They were expected to bring gifts for overlords, be present at their courts and provide them with military support. As samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Mahasamanta, Mahamandaleshwara and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. By the 17th century, there were many influential landlords or warrior chiefs in different parts of the subcontinent, and the existing kings, they were acknowledging themselves as their subordinates or samantas, and they were expecting the gifts for their kings or overlords to present at their courts and provide them the military support. And as soon as these samantas they gained the power and wealth, they declared themselves as Mahasamanta or Mahamandaleshwara, and they asserted their independence overlords. One such instance was that of the Rashtra Kutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid-8th century, Dandi Durga or Rashtra Kuta chief defeated a Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiryana Garbha. It was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not Kshatriya by birth. In other cases, men were enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba, Mayurasharman and the Gujara Parihara Harichandra were Brahmins who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms. So there was an instance that this Rashtra Kutas in the Deccan, initially they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka, and in the mid of 8th century this Dandi Durga and Rashtra Kuta chief, they have defeated Chalukya overlord and they have performed a ritual which is called as Hiryana Garbha, and it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer, that is Kshatriya, and it was not, but basically it was not Kshatriyas by birth. And when we will see the other cases, men who were from enterprising families and they were using their military skills to carve out kingdoms, and here the instance is given that Kadamba, Mayurasharman and the Gujara Parihara and Harichandra, they were the Brahmins who have given up their traditional profession and took to the arms, and successfully they have established kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan. Let's see about the administration in the kingdoms. Many of these new kings adopted high sounding titles such as Maharaja, Adhiraja, Tribhuvana Chakravarti and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their samantas as well as with the association of peasant traders and Brahmins. So, many of the new kings, they have adopted the high sounding titles such as Maharaja and Adhiraja, Chakravarti, etc. And however, in spite of such claims, they were sharing the power with their samantas as well as with the association of some peasants who were the farmers and the traders and Brahmins. In each of these kingdoms, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, artisans and traders were made to surrender a part of what they produced and sold. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to lord, which asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. So in such kingdoms, what was happening is the resources which were obtained from the producers, that is the traders, the peasants, the cattle keepers, the artisans, etc. So these resources were made to surrender a part of what they have produced and sold, and sometimes they were claiming themselves as the, and sometimes they were claiming as rent due to lot, and who have asserted that he owned the land and revenue was collected from the traders. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of wealth in the form of tribute and access to land as well as trade routes. So these resources which they were collecting from the producers, these resources which these kings were collecting from the producers, they were using to finance the king's establishment. So this produce was used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts, and they were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead the acquisition of wealth in the form of tribute and access to the land as well as to the trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue was gradually reunited from ruling families and positions were made hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held these positions. So these are where the functionaries. So the functionaries for collecting revenue, they were generally recruited from the ruling families, and the positions were hereditary, and this was about the true army as well. And in many cases, there were the close relatives of the king who were holding that positions. Let's see about warfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties was based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control over areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kannauj in the Ganga valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gujra, Parihara, Rashtra Kuta and Pala dynasty fought for control over Kannauj. As there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians often describe it as the tripartite struggle. So you may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties, they were based on a specific region, and at the same time they were trying to control the other areas as well. And one particularly prized area was the Kannauj, which is in Ganga valley, and for many centuries these rulers who were belonging to the Gujra, Parihara, Rashtra and Rashtra Kuta and Pala dynasties, they fought to control over this Kannauj, and there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians, and there were three parties. So in the long drawn conflict, these historians, they often describe them as a tripartite struggle. Now let's see about Muhammad Ghazni. One of the rulers, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, Afghanistan ruled from 997 Common Era to 1030 CE and extended control over parts of Central Asia, Iran and the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided northern India many times and plundered and destroyed wealthy temples, including that of Somnath in Gujarat. Much of the wealth that Mahmud looted was used to build the capital city at Ghazni. So he is one of the ruler of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, that is in Afghanistan. He ruled from 997 Common Era to 1030 Common Era, and he has extended his control over other parts of the Central Asia like Iran and the north part of the subcontinent and northwestern part of the subcontinent, and he also raided northern India many times, and he plundered and he destroyed several temples, including the Somnath temple, which is in Gujarat, and much of his wealth and the wealth which this Mahmud Ghazni has looted, that was used to build the capital city at the Ghazni. Sultan Mahmud was also interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al-Biruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as the Kitab al-Hind, is an important source for historians. Al-Biruni consulted Sanskrit scholars to prepare this account. So this Sultan Mahmud Ghazni was so much interested in finding out more about the people, and then he conquered and entrusted a scholar whose name is Al-Biruni, and he used to write the account of the subcontinent for Sultan Mahmud Ghazni, and his Arabic work is known as Kitab al-Hind. It is the important source for the historians, and Al-Biruni, he consulted with some Sanskrit scholars to prepare the account. Let's see about the Chahamanas, who are the Chauhans. Chahamanas, later known as Chauhans, ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadawalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Chahamana ruler was Prithviraja III, who defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 CE, but lost to him the very next year in 1192 CE. So these Chahamanas, they are the Chauhans and they have ruled the region around Delhi and Ajmer. And these people, they have attempted to expand their control to the west and east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and Gahadawalas in western Uttar Pradesh, and the best known Chahamana ruler was the Prithviraja III, as he defeated Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad in the year 1191 CE, but in the very next year he lost to him, that is 1192 CE. So this was all about the part 1 of our chapter, and now continue our part 2 of this chapter. So that was all about the part 1 of our chapter. Now continue with the part 2 of our chapter. So here the topic is the Cholas. How did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chiefly family known as the Muttarayar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings in Kanchipuram. Vijayala, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Udaipur, captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumba Sudhini there. So how did these Cholas get their power? How did they rise? So there is a minor chiefly family known as Muttarayar. They were holding the power in Kaveri Delta and they were subordinate to the Pallava kings, who were the Kanchipuram and Vijayala, who were the kings of Kanchipuram, and Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas. He was from Udaipur. He captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the 9th century. And then he built the town of Thanjavur and the temple for the goddess Nishumba Sudhini there. And there is a successor of Vijayalaya who conquered the neighboring regions, and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to south and north were made part of this kingdom. Powerful Chola ruler became the king in 985 CE and expanded his control over most of these areas. He also recognized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even conquered the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. So there is a ruler whose name is Rajaraja. He was so powerful Cholas ruler, and he became the king in 985 CE, and then he expanded his control over the most areas, and he also recognized the administration of the empire. Then later on, Rajaraja's son Rajendra I, he also continued his politics, and even he has conquered places in Ganga Valley like Sri Lanka and countries of Northeast Asia, and he have developed a navy for these expeditions. There are the splendid temples and bronze sculptures. So the big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, they were built by the Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei for settlements which grew around them. They were also the centers of craft production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The produce of this land went into maintaining the specialists who worked in the temple and very often lived near it. Priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc.